Hey everybody, Pastor Chris here. Just wanted to share with you our 30-day devotional and small group study on Ephesians that it is now available at thefollowproject.com. This is a really special work that God put on our heart, not only for the purpose of biblical literacy, but also to speak about how the body of Christ needs to be unified. And Paul puts that into such beautiful expression through the book of Ephesians. And so we have put together a 30-day small group study, but you can also do it from a personal devotional standpoint. And this is designed along with videos to help you come closer to the heart of God in your day-to-day walk. So we hope that it blesses you. You can check it out at thefollowproject.com. Thanks. We're going to turn it over to Pastor Mark now for the Sunday message.
Hello, church family. It's been a little while since we've been together. And in that time, my life has changed dramatically. And because of that, we're going to do something special here. I'm come through a process of this prophetic word that Chris had gotten for this year about breakout and breakthrough. I personally experienced both of those very recently, and because of that, the Lord has spoken to do something very unique and very special, and that is to sit down with you and tell you about, if you will, my testimony, my journey over 42 years of walking with Jesus. I'm here in the studio with Shannon today, and we just laid down that. And I just want to let you know that this isn't going to be a teaching. This is going to be about relationship. This is going to be relational. And I just hope that as you listen, you'll find value in it. And then in that value, too, you'll find nuggets that you can apply to your own life. So I hope you enjoy. At the beginning, right? That's the best place to start. And oh, what a beginning, right? I mean, the reality is that my life has been this consistent pattern. And this, we're going to talk about this as we go through this, Shannon. And I thank you for taking the time to do this. Before we go there, I just appreciate who you are, what you do for us, not only for the ministry, but for me personally. And God has used you personally in my life to actually help me to grow and mature into the things that I'm now becoming. And so I appreciate that. And when he showed me that we were going to sit down and do this, he actually showed you first, which was very interesting. You sent me that text, hey, when are we going to shoot? And I'm like, Jesus, what are we talking about here? And he gave me that look, right? And he gave me that look he can give. And he didn't clue me in for like another 8 hours. And then he goes, oh, by the way, this is what they're talking about. So he actually told you and Chris before he told me. And that's not unusual for him. He will do that. He'll throw a wrench in there to see how I respond. So that began a journey of, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna teach, and no, then we went through that iteration. No, it's not going to be teaching. And that took a day, and then, oh, okay, well, we're going to do I'm going to share theories and ideas and potential, and what I've learned, how, if you will, the practicality of walking with Jesus, right? And kind of give the technicalities of how to walk with Jesus. And he let me do that for half a day. And then he goes, no, that's not it. But all this time he's letting me do this, right? He's letting me develop these ideas, put together these, whether it be a lesson or this is how I'm going to explain this. I'm going to spend a day and a half on it, right? And each time he's like, no, that's not what we're going to do. And then finally, he was able to show me what he wanted to do. And that's when we had the conversation about you. And in that conversation, he said, I just want you to talk to her like if she was anybody. If she sat down and said, Mark, just tell me about your life. And can we take the next 2 hours and can you just kind of lay it out for me? I'd like to know who you are. And I'm like, okay, cool. Because people have asked me this all along my journey. But the reality is that they only get these little bits and nuggets and, how much can you get in, and there's interruptions and all this other crazy stuff. And so once he showed me that this is what I want to do, I want you to just sit down and one-on-one have a conversation with somebody who you respect, first of all, and you have a high regard for, and that you really believe that some of the things you can share with her may be of benefit at some point in her life, because 42 years of walking with Jesus, there's got to be at least a few nuggets in there that I've discovered. And that's what this journey is about. So I came to that point. I understood what he was doing. As soon as he made that clear to me, it was clear. And this is only within the last week that he made that clear. He then showed me what he's been doing over the last 2 months with me, okay? And so I know I'm at the end talking about this, but it's important to bring context to how this actually came about. Because it was not in my mind to do this. It was not in my heart to do this. He goes, no, I want you to do this for me. And so that's why we're here today, and sitting down at the end of June in 2025 just to have a conversation that somehow he sees value in for maybe the times we're in and the times that are coming. I don't know. He hasn't given me total context for that. But what he has said is just sit down and know who you are and let's talk about it. So since then, this last week, he's really expanded my understanding of my life because, there's things you forget. I mean, I'm 65 years old right now, and there's a lot of life that has become, shall we say, rose-colored, right? It's rose-colored. And because of the rose coloring, it may not be completely the true representation of that. And so that's why it was a valid process that I had to go through. And so that's why we're here today, and so I was born in Watertown, Minnesota, which is a small, well, probably a suburb of Minneapolis now, but at the time it was a small burg. It was definitely not even a one-horse town, and that's where I was born. And didn't live there for very long. My family relocated to Nebraska and specifically around the Omaha area, and we came to reside in just outside of Bennington, Nebraska, in a rented farmhouse. And that's really my earliest recollections of childhood. And I was one of 5 siblings. I was actually the youngest of 5. And the reality is, but I was the 4th son of my father because my oldest sibling was my mom's by a first marriage, and my dad adopted him. And so I'm actually the 4th son of my father, but the 5th son in the whole family that I grew up with. So I never knew that until much later. Much later, I was told my oldest brother was actually adopted, and much older, like 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there. So here we are living in Bennington. And my earliest memories of that is burning down the chicken coop, We were cold one day. Nebraska gets cold, especially in the winter. And my brother and I thought it was a great idea to start a little fire in the straw that was inside the chicken coop. But now no chickens were in it. So we didn't have fried chicken that day. But we were just we were boys and we were trying to be warm. Thought it was a good idea to light a fire. So it was obvious real quick that was getting out of control. So we ran outside because it was a building. It's not a very big building, but it had a door in the front and a roof. And it had these asphalt shingles on the top. Being a kid, you don't think about this stuff until in hindsight you go, oh, that's what that was. And so we grabbed this big tub of rainwater because all the rainwater was captured by this tub that would run off this chicken coop. And then it was supposedly to be used for the garden and other things. But we thought, well, that's a great way to put out a small fire because it was really small at that time. And that water, it was probably a 15, 20 gallon. It was a big pail. So we both picked it up, we throw it on it, and it goes woof, like somebody threw gasoline on a fire. And that's literally what we did because the years of that thing sitting there collecting rainwater off those asphalt shingles, it was actually fuel. It actually disintegrated into fuel. So we burned a chicken coop down. So that was my youngest memory that I have of living in Bennington. It's probably the most memorable one, So we were boys that will be boys. That's the reality. And that was my brother, John. So I started kindergarten in Bennington. But halfway through kindergarten, my family relocated, and I didn't know why. We just moved. We moved from the farmhouse to a big house. I called it the big house, and it was up on the hill, and it was nice, and it was new, and we each had our own rooms, and it had plenty of acreage to play on, and we were getting horses and all the crazy stuff a kid dreams about, right? And there we were. And it was years later that I discovered what had happened and why we got there. My father became very successful in the meat business with his cousins. And this was part of the payday from all that success was they were now able to purchase their own home. It was on an acreage, yada, 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 yada. And so this was the beginning of my true journey of actually becoming who you see today. I was just a kid before that. And the reason I say that is that's when I went to a one-room schoolhouse. I moved from Bennington to a one-room schoolhouse. And that was District 41, built in the 1800s. I mean, it was in great shape. So I went, it was, the time I entered, it was kindergarten through 8th grade. By the time I got up to 6th grade, that was as high as you could go. And those grades were moved into the rest of the school district, right? Separate parts of the district. So they were always trying to close it down all the time I was there. And I understand now why. I didn't understand why there's so much battling over that little school that served this little community of people. These 20, 18, 15, 20 families, however many there were, maybe it was less than that. But now I understand the education I got there. The education, the foundation of the education that I function out of was given there by those two teachers, Mrs. Merritt and her daughter. And so they taught us, and they actually taught us how to learn. They gave us the greatest thing we could ever have, and that's how to learn yourself. And that was the environment I grew up in. It was pretty cool. I didn't realize how valuable it was at the time, because at the time I was a kid. I didn't care. And I had all the issues that kids have, right? I was awkward. I was short. I had terrible eyesight. I'm blind, basically. Clear eyesight is this far from my face. I'm blind, basically. I wear contacts. And that happened at a very early age. And so that's always been something I've dealt with. And of course, I was only 5. I was a little kid. I was overweight. And so talk about target, right? I mean, glasses this thick, the whole 9 yards. It's all there. And so I became a target very early on in my life. And looking back, I see the value in having that target on my back. Was it the way God wanted it to happen? No. But did it develop character in me and perseverance in me and a depth of understanding and seeking truth? Yeah, all those things are there. And so that's why I speak about District 41 the way I do. It was really, if you will, the beginning of my journey as the person that sits here today, because you only get to see what you see today. You didn't get to see what I went through and all the human things that I did, and all the wonderful intersection I had with him, even not knowing it, right? And that's the value of doing this. It's the hindsight. We get to look back over it. And from there, I can pull out a couple nuggets and share those. And maybe somewhere along your journey, you'll find those nuggets. Oh, hey, that might be valuable here. And you may be able to learn something from my learning, and from that, take it further, because that's education, right? I'll give you what I know. Now you need to take that to a new level. And that's why it's so important to train our children in how to critically think and to learn, right? You have to learn to learn. You don't naturally learn. It's innate in us, but it's programmed out of us. And that's what this world does, is it programs those things out of us because they want to give us a certain narrative or certain focus or paradigm on how we see things. Everybody needs to see it the same way. That way it's easier to manage, right? I mean, this is the way the world works. They're always trying to label us and box us and put us down to, this is what you are. And that's why when people, as people call me pastor, I call it a 4-letter word. And the reason I do that is because it's so limiting in who I actually am. And the picture of pastors that most people have isn't positive. And that's not who I am. And so for a long time, I would rebel against that because people did this through my life, as I started to grow and mature and come to know Jesus more. And so, but that's the journey that we're all on, right? Whether we know it or not, he's passionately seeking. Father is passionately seeking to know us so that we'll know him. He already knows who we are, but he wants to know us as we are and bring us back to the knowledge of who he made us to be. That's the journey. That's the life. That's why we're here. And that's what gets to those 4 pillars. What I've discovered is the 4 pillars of life. Early on, I discovered about myself, I have this innate ability to recognize patterns. It's just always been there. I see things that other people don't see. I'm able to look at them and say, that doesn't fit there. I'm able to, in this space, this creative space, I'm able to bring those things together. And so that's always been there, that pattern recognition. So that's directly from him. That's part of my DNA that I took from God when he created me, right? And because of that pattern recognition, I have seen things continually in my life, beginning at that early age. I mean, I could see things in the kids that were around me at that time of my life that just didn't make sense to me. Because I grew up in a Lutheran church, which isn't, you can say what you say about Lutherans, but somewhere along the way, somebody told me that Jesus was coming back. And that kept me going. I'm telling you, through all my dark seasons of adolescence and puberty and all that stuff, that memory that, oh, he is returning. This isn't the end. That kind of thought, right? And so here I am. I'm growing up in this affluent family who's respected in the community, at least publicly. Now, privately, who knows, right? But publicly, we were respected because of the success that my family had. And me being one of those, I was considered kind of a royalty in that area. And I didn't know this. I was totally unaware of this, right? I didn't discover this until later in life when people had died and we were at funerals and people would share stories. And they would actually say these things. And we go, really? That's what you said? That's what you thought? You go, yeah, you lived in Camelot on the hill. That's who you guys were. You guys were kind of, the family. And it's like, wow, I never had that perspective. It was totally foreign to me. I grew, the life I remember growing up in was so different, mostly because my dad was so absent. And the reality is, it took a lot of years for me to figure out why he was absent. And I mean physically and emotionally absent. He spent only about a month with the family. He was on the road the rest of the time because we had 52 meat stores all over the United States. And so there was a lot of demand on his life. I get that. Job, right? Career. I get that. But when he was present, he wasn't present. And I picked up on that really early. And by the grace of God, I think my mom and my grandfather, his father, picked up on that too. And so my grandfather stepped into that role for me at a very young age. I can't remember him not being in that role for me. That's how young he stepped into that role. And an interesting sidebar on that is his middle name. He was Earl Walter Rasmussen. I'm Mark Walter Rasmussen. That's where I get my middle name from him. It was given to me as a sign of respect for him when I was born. And so I carry that with pride, because that reminds me of the man who actually did love me and did nurture me and did all those things that we want a father to be. He was that figure, right? And so that was a very powerful figure in my life because of the absence of my father, who in all ways showed as much love as he could because he'd been terribly abused by his mother. And I didn't discover that until he died, until family started talking about all the things he went through. And then I went back and looked at the photos. That explains why he looks like he's bones. All this, families don't talk about this stuff until too late. And so it brought a lot of context to a lot of pain and anguish of my growing up. And I was angry. I dealt with all the emotions of going through that, of being rejected by my father. I dealt with all those emotions, and most of them were not good. They were lashing out. But now in hindsight, I can see the value of forgiveness, right? It's always been necessary for me to choose to forgive. Forgiveness doesn't release the other person, it releases me. And so I had to go through that, and I did. And I acknowledge now, it's easy for me to acknowledge now that my dad loved me the best he could. He loved me with the love he understood he had. And that's important because I think we use this term love around here pretty freely. But it's not true love, because true love, as well stated by the greatest promise ever, is for God so loved the world that he gave. True love gives without any expectation of return. It just gives. It doesn't expect a return. It hopes for a return. It desires a return, but it knows it's giving it freely with no expectation. And this is the kind of love that I've been on a journey to discover with my whole life, which I had very early on. My grandfather, he was that to me. It was amazing how loving, what he implanted in me, those seeds that were there for 5 decades. And I was unaware of. And that's all because at my 6 days before my 11th birthday, April 5th, 1971, he dropped dead of a heart attack, doing what he loved, backing a brand new tractor off of the truck, just slumped over, drove it into the ditch, and that was it. I was devastated. Thinking about that moment, because I'm so far past it, right? But thinking about that moment, the devastation of this little boy looking at the one he looked up to for all the things that he cherished, right? The love, the acceptance, the desire to be better, all those things that are implanted by that love was gone. It was just gone in a moment. And I remember being at the funeral home, of course, a couple days later, in Oakhorn, and I was just on the couch, and it was one of the best memories I have of my dad. This is strange to say, but it's the best memory I have of my dad because he was sitting on the couch next to me, and I was weeping uncontrollably. I was just full of sorrow, uncontrollable loss and sorrow. And he was holding me in that moment. And of course, people would walk up to give their condolences because, it was his dad. And they'd look and he'd just say, he just really loved him and he really misses him and he just needs this time. That's what he said. That's what I remember anyway. What he really said, who knows? But that's what I recall. And it's sad to say, but that's the best memory that I have of my dad, that moment where he showed me that compassion and that support in a very painful time. Still painful when I think about it. It's not painful here, but I remember the memory as what it actually was. And that's part of this journey I think we have to reconcile within ourselves is we're going to experience things that we've experienced before and they're going to affect us still. That doesn't mean we're stuck. No, that means it was real. It was real. Right? And it speaks to the validity of the experience and the emotion that we tie to it. It validates that. It validates it's real. And so that's what my takeaway from that was. And so I didn't realize it. I didn't remember it. I buried it so deep. But in that moment somewhere, I made a statement. I verbally made a statement. I will no longer love anybody the way I loved that man, and I will never allow anybody to love me the way he did. I don't ever want to feel this pain again. I said it somewhere in there, and I only know this because years later, 5 decades later, the Lord going through a healing process, the Lord showed me that's still there. We have to deal with that, and we had to go back and deal with that. I didn't know. I was a 10-year-old kid. So here I am. I'm growing up. I'm growing up as a man, and I'm actually emotionally a 10-year-old boy inside. That's a recipe for danger and destruction, if nothing else, right? So that was a key point in my life. Another key point in my life was the death of my grandfather, and it took decades, 5+ decades. For me to actually see the kingdom value in his death. And it sounds weird to say it that way, but it's because of what I've experienced at a later time, and we'll talk about, perhaps we will pass along. But just suffice it to say this, that God was present in the moment. He was present in the moment. And I had to go through that in order to become who I am today. And I think that's probably one of the very first important lessons I learned. The pain that we experience is actually used by him. That's Romans 8:28.